Terry and I are really excited to participate in this series and share what we've been working on here at Georgetown. As Nathan mentioned, my name is Suzanne Chase. I'm the head of the Digital Services Unit here at Georgetown University Library, and I'm joined by Terry Brady, our Applications Programmer Analyst. And please do jump in at any time. This is pretty informal. We're going to just run through a presentation and then show you all some live demos of our tools and workflows. So if anything is unclear during our presentation or during the demos, please feel free to chime in, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions. Okay, so just a brief overview of what we're working with at Georgetown. So our digital assets are in a few different buckets of content. The majority are in our digital Georgetown DSpace repository. So we have several different communities and collections within the repository. We don't send everything to APTrust. The two main buckets that we prioritize to send are our institutional repository collections, which is faculty and student scholarly works, white paper reports, conference proceedings, reports from our various centers on campus, that kind of thing, as well as especially our electronic theses and dissertations for the whole university. In addition to the institutional repository, we have prioritized our digital special collections content. So this is primarily content that is from our archives, manuscripts, rare books, and art collections here in the library. So things that are either coming in born digital to us that we want to preserve, or content that we've digitized, such as archival documents and rare books and that kind of thing. We also have some content within our archive space finding aid database. So we have both a public and a staff user interface using archive space, and a lot of our collections, especially the archival ones, are described in archive space. Some of them also have DSpace metadata, but we wanted to develop a system that could send things that were only described in archive space, and we'll demo that today as well. Finally, we have some content in Embark, which is our art collections management system. That is a system that's sort of new to the library, so the curators working with it are currently populating it. So we envision that being a future workflow we might want to integrate with our APTrust tools, but we have not done that yet. So just a little bit about our preservation strategy. Unlike, I think, a lot of the other institutions participating in APTrust, we bag our content at the item level. We do this because the way that DSpace is set up with the handle system and archive space with unique identifiers, all of our items already have unique IDs, so we can carry those over as into the bag name, which is helpful for management. And also, a lot of our collections are not completed. Maybe some of the things we've digitized are, but a lot of the collections in our institutional repository will be receiving new content on an ongoing basis. So, for example, our history department, as new PhDs graduate, we have new dissertations and theses going into those collections every semester. So we wanted a way to send content from a collection that would be added to, and doing our content on the item level enable us to do that. And finally, since we're sending a lot of our metadata from DSpace as the APE files or AIP files, it was easy just to export those on the item level to parse into our bags. So finally, for an intro, our workflow development. Before I came on board, which was about a year ago, the tools we're going to show today were developed in early 2016. And then we really ramped up about this time last year. We were lucky enough to have a National Digital Stewardship resident, Joe Carano. For those of you who aren't familiar with the program, it's a Library of Congress internship residency program where a recent graduate is placed in an institution, usually a cultural heritage institution, and helps the staff at that institution work on digital preservation projects. And usually there's one main focus of that project, and for Joe's, it was helping us develop our workflows and working through our backlog of content that needed to be preserved. So he just left. Actually, yesterday was his last day. So we just wanted to give Joe a shout out. We definitely couldn't have done this without him. And he's taken a new job at MIT as our digital archivist, so we're very glad for him. So in 1 year, we've been able to use these tools and workflows to work through almost our entire backlog of content. And to date, we've ingested a little over 3 terabytes of content into APTrust. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Terry.
So what I want to do is give you a description of the system that Suzanne will demo later on in this presentation to give you a sense of how we came up with the design decisions we came up with. So we have digital files that we want to preserve. And each of these digital files are already described in one of our existing systems, DSpace, ArchiveSpace, or Embark. And if we do have digital objects that aren't described in one of those three systems, we felt like those systems are probably the best place to go ahead and describe them. And as Suzanne mentioned, these systems have a mechanism for assigning a controlled identifier to every item. And we wanted to build a lot of workflow around that controlled identifier. So we designed an inventory management system to help us track what we've sent to AP Trust. And here are some concepts that we came up with in that system. So we have what we call milestones, and milestones are major groups of content that we want to preserve, like audio archives or theses and dissertations or some other collection of information. So milestones are really a kind of a project management concept. Then what we have are what we call batches, and batches are bundles of similar items that we want to process at one time. So these are items that will go through a similar workflow. And then a batch consists of items, and items are described, as I mentioned, in one of our systems of record. And then for each item, we'll kick off jobs, and those jobs are the things that actually send content up to the preservation system. We also have a mechanism for tracking individual files associated with an item. This is really designed for capacity planning. If we had large collections of offline digital content, we just kind of wanted to track how much we expected to send in a given year. So one of the things is I'm going to mention in the course of this presentation several tools that we have made available if folks are interested. This inventory management system was really sort of tightly connected to a lot of our, the way our servers are configured and designed. And so this system itself didn't seem suitable for publishing, but as I'll mention several tools that we do think could be useful and helpful to you. And I'll point those out as we go through the presentation. So there are three tools that I'll mention that we have made available. So we have a tool we use called File Analyzer for doing a lot of digitization support. And we use that as a wrapper around the Bagot Java library to create our AP Trust bags. We also have a command line interface to the ArchiveSpace API to facilitate exports from ArchiveSpace. And we have a command line tool that will pull the AP Trust API and detect when an ingest has been completed. So I'll point those out as we go through the
Terry,
flow diagrams. Yeah.
I just want to state, I think all of these are Java-based. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
All right, so here's the general workflow for our system, and we'll talk through each of the boxes on this diagram. So the first task we perform is we export content from one of our systems of record. And in the case of DSpace, what we do is we export AIP packages using the DSpace packager command. And when we export those packages, we definitely export metadata, and we may or may not export bit streams or digital files depending on the workflow that we're running. When we when we do our ETD exports, we do include the binary files or the bit streams. And we also have a workflow where we export using the REST API and DSpace the entire collection hierarchy. So if we needed to reconstitute the hierarchy at a future date, we have the ability to do that. When we interact with ArchiveSpace, we export EADs using the ArchiveSpace API. And so here's a link to our command line interface for the ArchiveSpace API. Essentially, you give an object identifier, and it will trigger the API to generate the EAD for you. So Embark, we have not yet implemented this, and unsure if we'd be able to have a fully automated interaction with Embark, but at least conceptually we'd want to be able to export metadata from Embark and go through a similar workflow. So the next thing we do then is we take our exported content and we put it in what we call an assembly folder. This assembly folder is accessible both to our servers where we run the automated processes, as well as to Suzanne's team, so they can actually browse the assembly folders and review the contents of the folders. In some instances, particularly for preservation files that don't exist in DSpace or one of the other systems, we'll manually load preservation files into an assembly folder so they get associated with the right metadata. And so these folders are accessible so that quality assurance can be performed on the folders. Our next step then is we package our bag files into APTrust compliant bag files. Again, that was using the file analyzer tool that I mentioned. And so some of the things that we do when we run this custom bagging task are we determine the bag name purely from the item metadata. So the user doesn't have the ability to assign a bag name. It's predetermined based on the item identifier. We take the collection identifier for the item, particularly for DSpace, and store that in the bag group identifier field in the APTrust manifest file. We populate the other APTrust manifest fields in the manifest file. We use the Library of Congress Bagit jar or Java tools which create zip files, and then we turn that into an APTrust compliant tar file that conforms to the naming standards. And that tool is open source. It has several functions that it performs, but one of which is you can invoke the command line option to build these APTrust bag files. So then now that we have our bag created, we use the APTrust partner tools to validate the contents of the bag to make sure all our assumptions are correct. Then we use the partner tools to initiate an upload to the APTrust server. And when we initiate that upload, an e-tag is returned, and we save that e-tag into our inventory system so we can verify that the ingest we thought we initiated is the one that has actually completed. So our next step is on sort of a schedule. I think we check every 10 minutes. We look for any ingests that we think are in progress. We pull the APTrust API to find any that are recently completed. If the e-tag matches, then we consider that ingest to be complete. We update our inventory system and we go and clean up the assembly folder because all the resources now have been verified up at APTrust. That APTrust verification tool, again, that we've made available on GitHub. And one suggestion I have is I actually think that this is, if any institution is building automation, this would be a really handy thing to implement as an APTrust partner tool. Just otherwise, people need to go and manually verify bag names and e-tags through the interface. Lastly, then now that we know the ingest has been confirmed, we update metadata back in the system of record. In the case of DSpace, we actually automatically create a DC identifier other field, and we store the APTrust bag name, the bagging date, and the e-tag. In the case of ArchivesSpace, because we don't expect a high volume, we're manually going in and annotating ArchivesSpace with the bag information. We also have a schedule once a day that we look for any restores that have been queued up through the APTrust web portal. And we go ahead and retrieve those files. We load those to the same assembly folder that the digital services team uses when preparing stuff for ingest. And our resident that we had on staff You can go to the next slide. Kind of went through and ran periodic restores for us to verify that the restore process was something that we could trust. So we initiate restores once a day. We use the AP Trust partner tools to perform the restore. We did actually encounter one issue early on when we started running these restore checks, and we reported that to AP Trust, and the issue was resolved. But this gave us a good amount of confidence that we kept requesting restores on a weekly basis just to verify that this is a process we could trust. And so at this point, Suzanne's going to show you a series of workflows, and this screen is indicating a place where you'll see as she's doing her work, the spot where we designate a particular workflow. And I see there's a question.
Yeah, we can, if there's it looks like there's a question from Linda. When running the ingest validation tool, are you communicating using the AP Trust Pharos API?
I know I've seen Pharos in the server name that we set up, so I think that is the one that we're talking with. Did that answer your question? All right, great.
If anyone else doesn't has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them now, or please ask questions as I show the demos, and then we'll have some time at the end as well for questions. Okay. Looks like Linda says she just generated my key to use that API.
Yeah, and so yeah, definitely it's a pretty handy feature. It's a little, using the API is a little more complex than just using the partner tools on the command line, but they've got a bunch of nice features that they built in.
Great. All right. Well, as Terry said, now I'm just going to show some of our workflows and then do a live demo for you all. And this screen shows what we'll look at in a minute, which is our dashboard. And so the first workflow I'm going to demo is preserving an institutional repository item. So this would be the case where we would have both the metadata and the bitstream file that are exported from our DSpace repository. So, preservation files are wonderful, and we normally hope we have higher quality files to use to send to AP Trust, but for a lot of our content, all we have is our Access bitstream. So a good example of this would be our electronic theses and dissertations. Students submit their PDFs, and that's both our Access and our preservation files, so that's the item that we preserve into AP Trust. So just a high-level schematic of this is that we export from DSpace both the metadata and the bitstream that we want to preserve. As Terry mentioned, we use a location on our server to package those into an assembly folder. We add the APT info into the bag, and then we send that bag into AP Trust with our ingest tools. So I'm going to now show you all a live demo of that. And if you have questions, please feel free to either chat or use your microphone. So just make sure I'm still logged in here. This is an example of our AP Trust dashboard. So I'm currently in our test system, but it's pretty much a mirror of our production system. So you can see we've done a variety of tests for different collections and different individuals working in the system. So I'm going to start our process by creating a new milestone. And I'm just gonna get out of full screen here. Hopefully you all will still be able to see everything that I'm showing. So I'm going to click on this new milestone. And as Terry mentioned, the milestone is really our high-level collection. So normally I wouldn't have multiple types of content in a milestone, but for today's purpose, I'm just going to have a single milestone. So I'm going to call it APT demo workflow. And I'm going to give it a date of today and use that same date for the end date, since I don't expect this process to take longer than today. And for the description, I'm just going to call it our demo workflows. Okay. This milestone status is something we don't currently use, so we just leave this as inactive, but this is sort of something we can choose to invoke at a later date. So once I've set up my milestone, I'll click submit. And now when I go back to that dashboard, I can see here's my milestone. And it currently has 0 batches, but when I click on that, I can say new batch. And so I'm setting up my first batch, and that's going to be, as I mentioned, exporting both the master bitstream and the metadata from DSpace. So just to show you all before I get started, I had set up a little test collection. This is our Digital Georgetown test system. So we have our AP Trust bagging webinar and demo community, and I have 3 collections in this community. The first workflow, here's the item I'm going to be preserving today. This is a report from one of our centers on campus, the Beck Center for Social Justice and Social Impact and Innovation. And so here's the file I'll be sending to AP Trust, and you can see there's metadata that I'll be sending as well. So let me go back here into my batch, and I'm just going to call this batch workflow 1. The title, and it's in our APT demo workflow milestone. And for the item type, this is the dropdown we had a screenshot of. This is where you can select basically which workflow process you're working in today. So this is going to be DSpace master bitstream, and I'll click submit. Information automatically gets written into the batch here, and now I can click add items from DSpace. So this is really nice with the dashboard. It's sort of just a drop-down menu where we have the full contents of our repository. So you can see all of our collections here. Mine's right at the top, the APT bagging webinar workflow 1 collection, which was that item, Smarter Government for Social Impact. And we have the option to either import all the items in that collection or to only import items without the APT metadata. So this is kind of what Terry was talking about when we have items that we need to send that weren't, as a collection is updated, I can select that, and then it will only send items that have not already been ingested into AP Trust, which is a really nice feature. But in this case, I'm going to select import all items, verify, and we can see our item right here. It has the handle, so if I wanted to, I could just verify that that is indeed the item that I'm sending. And now when I click add, oh, I'm sorry, Terry?
You need to add that.
Oh, great, sorry.
No problem.
So you need to add the item. So add the items now to my import. Okay, so now I can see the item has been added. So now when I click on current batch, I can see that I have this option to start the job. And basically what that'll do is it'll communicate with our server location, and this bag was just created. So with the bitstream, that shouldn't be a problem, but so now if I click on the job, I can see that it's started and it's in the pre-validated status. So what we thought we would do today is just sort of show a few of the workflows and then come back and check on this periodically, and hopefully, so it's now gone to the pre-validated step, and eventually, hopefully, the upload will finish today and we can show you what that looks like.
So when Suzanne went to that folder, that was an AIP exported from DSpace, sitting in the folder right now.
So I'm going to go back into our presentation really quick, and for the second demo we're going to show you is how we would preserve an item that's described in DSpace, but where the preservation file lives externally. So an example of this that I'm going to show is one of our photographs from University Archives. So go back to my collection in DSpace, go to my second item here. So we have a photograph from the Georgetown University Archives of our Georgetown Prep Football team from the early 1900s. So in this case, you can see we're providing access to a JPEG version of the file, but here on my desktop, I have a TIFF that I want to preserve. It's a higher quality file. So I want to send the metadata from this item, but not the file itself. So in that sense, we will go back to our milestone. And I'm going to say new batch.
I think you're in the wrong milestone.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Terry.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
The example you just gave where you have just an access file essentially in DSpace, it's just that the archival masters were never put into DSpace and they just live in a file system somewhere, and now we want to join them together for AP Trust? Or, well, I guess add the master to the metadata?
We actually, in this case, we don't send the JPEG to AP Trust. We just send our preservation files. So yeah, there was a decision made that we would just provide access to our digital special collections in DSpace through lower resolution files, so access level files. So for our archival content, things are either JPEGs or PDFs, and then we have tons of external hard drives with a large amount of preservation files from past digitization projects. So that was kind of our main push with AP Trust, was to get those off of all the external media and network drives and send them on to AP Trust.
Cool. Thanks.
And just to verify your question, we've never treated DSpace as like a preservation repository or as a temporary preservation repository. So those files have not been loaded.
Mm-hmm. And we don't have a separate system as like a digital asset management system. So yeah, this was a good way for us to send those files to preservation storage. So I'm back in my correct milestone here, and I'm going to click on new batch, and I'm going to call this one workflow 2. And in my dropdown, instead of sending a DSpace master bitstream, I'm going to select DSpace access bitstream here. Click submit, and then add items from DSpace. So as I mentioned, the item we're sending today is a photograph of the Georgetown Prep football team, and it's in our workflow 2 collection. So from my dropdown, I can select that, import all items, verify, and then add the items. Remember to select that. Okay, so the items have been added, and now when I click batches in current milestone, I can start this one, and it started. And now when I go back to my location, I should see that item as well. So here it is. And in my directory, I only have the XML metadata. I don't have the bitstream. So what I need to do is add the bitstream. So this is where Terry was explaining it's more of a manual process. As you can imagine, we do have, collections with hundreds and hundreds of TIFFs. So we have a couple batch scripts that we would run as opposed to just, copying your content over. But for this single item, that's kind of an easy way to do it. So now that I've added the bitstream to the folder, I can click on the item and click validate. And it just kind of gives me a little message that says, these are the contents for the folder that I'm about to bag, the XML file, and I can see my TIFF file. If it looks correct, proceed, and it does. So now I can see that my item has gone into the bagging step. So just going back to my milestone, I'm going to go into there and say all batches. I'm curious if this item, it looks like it's still receiving. So we can continue to do our third workflow and then come back and check on that one as well.
So we probably won't be able to see it fully processed before this webinar is over, because AP Trust checks on the 0 o'clock hour, like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock for the receiving buckets. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to pick it up until 5.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it's any different in the test repository, but.
Oh, all right. We're in the test repository. I don't know if that's different. Maybe Christian can provide a detail there. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I'll continue on to our third item, but yeah, please, anyone, if you have additional questions, feel free to jump in. So. And I didn't show the workflow for that one, but as you just saw, basically we're exporting the metadata from DSpace, adding our preservation file, and then bagging it and sending it on to APTrust. And we just wanted to quickly say that we do have a workflow we're not going to show today where we can simply update the metadata in a bag. So if we find, there was a title error or something missing from the metadata that we wanted to add, like a provenance node, we could update the metadata in DSpace, re-export it, and then update that in the bag without having to resend the bitstream. And this is just a little schematic of that. So the final workflow we were going to show today, our third demo, is how to preserve an item that's described in ArchivesSpace. And we can do this with either a resource or an accession. So we were thinking, with the more and more of our content coming, especially for university archives coming as born digital accessions, our curators and archivists are getting tons of stuff, and a lot of times a collection can't be fully processed with a full finding aid like everyone would like before it might need to be sent for preservation to ArchivesSpace or to APTrust. So we have the capacity to send materials that are described in ArchivesSpace simply as an accession as well as a resource. So I'll be showing something that's from a full finding aid today, but we do have the capacity to send just an accession record. So in this workflow, we will export metadata from ArchivesSpace. In that case, it's an EAD file. The preservation files will be added, the bitstreams, similar to the last workflow, since they do not live within ArchivesSpace. We don't store digital assets in that system. It's just metadata only. And those are bagged with the APT info and then ingested into APTrust. So I'm going to pop back into my dashboard, and the item I'm going to show you for this third workflow is from our university archives. It's a sort of Come to Georgetown bulletin from 1980, and this collection, this is a test server of our ArchivesSpace repository. It's from the Student Prospectuses and Related Materials collection. So this is something that I'll show in a minute. We basically just need this identifier from the finding aid to export our metadata from ArchivesSpace. So I will click New Batch here. And again, just call it Workflow 3 this time. And in the drop-down menu, I have the option to select a space collection. So I will click Add Items from ArchivesSpace Resource. And within this screen, we need to select our repository. So we have 5 different entities on campus who use ArchivesSpace. So in this case, as I mentioned, the items from the university archives. So I'll select that. And this is a resource on an accession record. And then I'm just going to go into ArchivesSpace and grab my identifier. And this will call the ArchivesSpace API, as Terry mentioned. And as we can see, here's the identifier, the title of the collection, the URL to the finding aid. So I'm going to select that. Verify the item. And add the item. So I can now see that this, this finding aid EAD record has been added to the batch. So clicking on Batches and Current Milestone, going into Workflow 3, I can click Start. And again, going back to my server folder, I can see that this assembly folder has now been created. So in the directory, it's just the EAD file. So similar to the previous workflow, I have here on my desktop the file I want to send, and I'm just going to copy that into the directory. And when I click on the items, I can validate that. And it'll again tell me that I have the EAD file as well as the bitstream, and I can confirm that that's the item I indeed want to send. And the bagging has started. So going back to my milestone here, I can just go in and click on my batches and kind of see where everything is. And as you can see, they've all started. They're all still receiving, or this one started, but it hasn't started receiving yet. So we can, have time for some Q&A. We still have about 20 minutes left, and hopefully, maybe by then something will have completed. But what we'd like to show you all mainly is, especially with the first workflow, going back to DSpace, what will happen is when the item has been validated and ingested into AP Trust, what will happen is in the metadata, and as Terry mentioned, a new identifier will be written back into the metadata with the e-tag and a time and date stamp. So that'll just be another confirmation that the item was indeed received by AP Trust. So we can continue to look out for that. But kind of going quickly back into our presentation, we wanted to end with just a little wish list of some of our items. So we would love to have the ability to specify if a bag update is intended as an incremental replace or a full replace. So in DSpace, when we replace a bit stream, the exported file name changes, and if you update that bag, AP Trust retains both versions of the bit stream. And a lot of times, for example, our ETDs, we might have a PDF of the student's final paper, a PDF of their permissions where they can, say which publishers they contacted, that kind of thing, a license file. So it's often difficult with the multiple bit streams to tell which file you want to delete from the bag. So in this instance, it would be great to treat that as a full replace, and that would be kind of an enhancement we would love to see happen. And then finally, the ability to search for bags by bag group identifier. As Terry mentioned, since we store or we're sending our items to AP Trust on an item level and in bags, we store the collection identifier as a bag group identifier metadata field. And it would be really nice to search by that in case, we hope this never happens, but if we ever needed to restore items from a full collection and reassemble that for access, it would help us facilitate that goal. So at this point, I see there's some questions in the chat, and I will, let's see. Okay. So Nathan says a yay for ArchivSpace public user interface. Yep. So you all actually just got to see a sneak peek of our very, very newly installed 2.1.2 ArchivSpace instance. That's only on our test repository. Our archivists and curators are testing it, and we hope to push that out to production soon. And Christian says the demo system reads the buckets every 16 minutes as opposed to hourly. So great. So we can continue to refresh, and hopefully we will see one of those have been confirmed and validated. Oh.
And we have a timer on our end too that actually pulls, so it's possible as well. It could be waiting on our end to run our process that will trigger the receipt.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like it's receiving. So, but yeah, at this point, that's kind of what we wanted to show you all today. We're happy to take questions.
Suzanne, can you hear me? This
Yes.
is Lynn's. Great.
Hi.
I think this is great. And if I understood from the very beginning, you all have shared some of the tools that this interface you're showing us calls, but you haven't put the interface itself up in GitHub. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. I think it could be of use. I understand you'd have to hide any any information you use to facilitate login and stuff like that. You wouldn't want to contribute to GitHub, but I think it could be really interesting to see how you all put this together. Because I think it's great that you're not having to go. What I have to do is go back and forth between my Linux command line on my DSpace system and repo.aptrust.org to see what's happening. Do you ever find yourself still going to repo.aptrust.org, like say if you want to delete a bag?
We do go into the repository itself. For the demo site, we really haven't done too much cleaning up. Terry, I know there's been a few situations where Joe needed to replace content from production. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So in that case that Suzanne described where we need to replace a bit stream within a bag, we've had to either kind of hunt and find just the file we want to delete out of the bag, or we've gone into the web interface and just deleted the entire bag and then resubmitted it as a new ingest. The other thing is we'll kick off restores using the web portal for AP Trust.
And then my other unrelated question is, are you generally creating a bag per work? Are you ever exporting a set of works, or per handle, if you were talking about DSpace, for example? So do you, depending on which way you do it, do you have essentially a database of all your handles to make sure that you've actually covered all the handles in your system?
So in DSpace, because we add metadata when the ingests are complete, we can sort of run a query that says, show me all the items that don't have that metadata field.
Okay.
We also do have our own, we don't delete anything from the inventory system that sends stuff out, but I think because we understand the DSpace metadata better, that's probably what we would use to filter and determine if we had missed any items. I think the time where we're most likely to send a group of items might be at the point when we want to preserve a whole accession. So in that case, we just have, the description of the accession and then a bunch of digitized files. We'd send those all up as a big block.
Okay. So I missed, you probably covered it, but I'm curious about how you're updating the metadata behind the scenes, what DSpace mechanism you're using to update your DSpace record.
So what we do is we create the equivalent of a little folder for each item, and then we create a metadata XML file that contains the identifier, the unique identifier of the item we want to update, and the metadata field that we want to add, so the DC identifier other. So Suzanne, maybe if nothing is complete, maybe we could just take a look at an already archived item, even in production. And
so you're just using the DSpace batch update method then?
Yeah, just the item update.
Yeah, okay.
Process. And I would say if anyone is interested in the inventory management system that we've created, I'd be happy to talk one-on-one in a meeting, show what we have, and if we feel like there's a way to extract the useful pieces for somebody else to make use of, I'd be delighted to do that. So just reach out to me and we could chat about that.
So here's an example of an item. This is a thesis from our Department of English. So here's the DC identifier other with the bag and for eTag written back into the metadata.
I had a question that I think you may have answered, Terry, in responding to Linda's question. And when you were talking about the inventory system and that you never remove anything from it, is that assembly folder that was in that diagram where you start to actually, what I would say, stage the files? Is that you don't delete it after you have sent the content to AP Trust? You keep a look?
No, the assembly folders we want to clean up because we could sort of have finite amounts of space specifically for the binary files.
Mm-hmm.
But at the start of the presentation, I had like a little entity relationship diagram almost showing milestone, batch, item, job. And that's all stored in a Postgres database.
Oh, okay.
And so that Postgres database, we don't ever go purge it, but the system would still run if we had to purge and recreate that from scratch.
So when you said you restore, you said it goes back to the assembly folder. But if you clean out the assembly folder, what does it go back to?
Oh, so that's just for the restore is kind of, we see it as that's sort of an odd task that we need to perform. So it's just placed there as a convenience. But what happens to something after it's been restored is that kind of undetermined. So we have no automation once it's been restored. The assumption is someone will need to do something manual with that restored content.
And we all hope it never happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, having, again, Joe as our resident, he was able to help us have a little more confidence in the system, especially since doing our early restores, we did find an error with Amazon Glacier, and that was all fixed, and it was with the Elastic file system. We're happy that was fixed, but I think because of that, before making any decisions about our local copies of content, do we delete them? Because we really, as we mentioned, don't have a separate digital asset management system, and we really don't have server space to provide access to all of our preservation files, nor would we in all cases. There are certain, we've had a lot of conversations about when would we be ready to start either deleting some of our content locally or just being okay if the hard drives failed. We can't keep backing this stuff up continually on our external media, which was our goal with getting AP Trust. So doing those extra restores helped us, have a little more trust in the system. And now that we feel that the problems have been worked out, we are not doing as many restores.
So you're working towards a point where you won't have TIFFs at all locally? They'll just be an AP Trust?
It's sort of to be determined. We haven't made any decisions about that. And actually, I think last month or a few weeks ago, I put out an email on the AP Trust Google group just to inquire about what other folks are doing with their local preservation content. At Georgetown, I think we envisioned AP Trust as being, we know nothing can be the be-all, end-all of storage, but this is kind of our premier system. So we want to, invest in it. We want to have faith that it's going to be there for us should anything happen. And so, again, a lot of our past content, especially things that were from digitization projects, only live on an assortment of external hard drives. And, we all know that hard drives fail. So we feel that, once we've sent these things to AP Trust, should that happen, should a hard drive fail, we have this backup. So I'm actually, for those of you who are going to be attending the partner meeting next week, I'm curious to kind of have that conversation with other institutions once they've worked through a backlog, sent their digitized content to AP Trust. What are the local practices that people are envisioning using?
You might want to talk to Dina Sokolova from Columbia. A couple years ago, Stephen Davis had, who at that time was coming to the AP Trust meetings. I don't think he's as closely involved anymore, but he had expressed that aspiration that they would never have to pay for TIFF storage locally because it would all be at AP Trust. But I don't know. I was sort of thinking about, well, I know if you get a request for publication or something and someone wants a high res, having to pull down a whole bag to be able to supply that TIFF could get cumbersome.
And that's kind of, again, the nice, sorry to interrupt you, but by having our items bagged on an item level, it's not quite as unwieldy. So we don't have to sift through, a collection that could be hundreds of images looking for that one. It's still an added step, but that was kind of another thought with the item level bagging, is that maybe it would enable us to do those kinds of things if we had to.
Yeah, I think he had even talked about, maybe AP Trust could give you a one-time token-based link to the TIFF stored in S3 from AP Trust even, which, if there's certainly a lot of people doing that, it might be more something worth pursuing in Pharos.
Yeah, I hope it'll be a good conversation at the meeting. And I'm happy to say that I just refreshed and our items have completed. So we can show you finally in our APT upload box, we have metadata receipt. So now if I refresh my item, I can see my APT bag e-tag with the date and time there that it was ingested, which is great. And if I go back to my second item, I should be able to see the same thing. So I'm just going to refresh that and go to the full record. And there's my e-tag. So if I were to go into the demo repository, I would be able to see those items as well being sent. So from a digital collections manager perspective, this is a nice kind of added validation that the items received, and you can see the metadata. As Terry mentioned, the last step in this process, we haven't integrated or automated the e-tag back into the archive space finding aid. So what we would do is from our staff interface, go into the finding aid and add an event to that finding aid with the ETAG information. So that would be stored in the finding aid. So anyone, that was unsure if items from this collection had been sent to AP Trust could verify that.
Susanna, I have a question where maybe it's really more of a question for Christian, who I see is on the line. Is that ETAG information we should try to keep private for any security reasons?
I was wondering that too. All the S3 bucket leaks lately, it's AWS security is on the radar.
And I see Christian's muted. I don't know if he's answering.
Yeah. Well, you all probably know I've been, I put in some comments on that collection policy, which are related to security. Again, I'm anxious for AP Trust to do their security audit, and that might just be the type of detail we just need to know about keeping our archives, our dark archives, secure.
I thought we create that ETAG, and it's not actually the ETAG that S3 has, if I remember correctly, but Andrew might know better.
Are you saying that there's an internal ETAG that's different or something? That's
I believe so. I vaguely remember it, but I'm not 100% certain.
Oh, is it because that's the ETAG for receiving, and then as it moves through different buckets in AWS, it might get a different ETAG that is used in the Pharos, but the work items use the receiving ETAG, I believe, in the system. The items, because those are batches that are processed.
Possibly. I can check real quick.
So can we use that ETAG to find the bag later for purposes of restoration, or is it just sort of a temporary assignment of data?
That's actually a good question. I have not, we saved it, but I haven't actually gone and tried to search with the one that we're putting in our metadata.
It is returned in the API and the item endpoint, so you could query with the API on an ETAG to find out the status of the work item, but the work items are just as they're going through ingest. They become objects once they're in Pharos.
Mm-hmm.
And it does look like the object resource also has an ETAG delivered through the API, so you could query there too. But that might be where we need clarification from Andrew and Christian about whether or not that's the same ETAG.
I mean, on the one hand, you want to retain the information that lets you from the record, whether it was in DSpace or archive space, to find the resource, but on the other hand, you don't want to be broadcasting information you shouldn't, that could be misused.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't understand well enough what we have to cover our security to know whether that's a real concern or not.
That's a great point. Definitely something for us to follow up on with Christian and Andrew. Well, looks like we're just about at 5 o'clock. We're happy to stay for a few more minutes if there are any additional questions. We also wanted to just put up a link to our GitHub page with some of the tools we've described today, and just say thank you for joining us. This email address, digitalscholarship@georgetown.edu, will come to both Terry and I, as well as our colleagues. So if you have questions related to what we've covered today, or just more general questions about how we're using AP Trust and our tools and workflows, we'd be happy to take this offline and discuss with you all further.
I'm very impressed with what you've done here. It just gives you the potential to really automate, well, maybe automate's the wrong word, regularize your processes in a way that, so.
Yeah, it's been wonderful, especially like we said in the beginning, having our National Digital Stewardship resident, Joe Carano, having him really dive into these tools and processes and kind of learn them inside out and be able to work through a lot of our backlog has been a tremendous help and peace of mind, I think, for all of us. So.
Yeah, and interesting is we've sent, triggered thousands of ingests, seeing all the different spots where, oh yeah, what happens if we need to restart at point, B or point C? And so that it's been interesting to refine those, all those restart and recovery processes along the way.
Well, thank you very much, Terry and Suzanne, for being the brave first in our series of webinars. It's going to be hard to follow up on this one, I think. I've got some duct tape and bash scripts myself to get the job done, so it is woefully nowhere just compared to what you guys have. I wonder, could you send me the slide deck, and then I can put that up wherever we put the video recording for folks?
Sure.
Happy to.
Right. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for
everyone.
coming. And see you in Maryland, perhaps.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Good night.
All right, take care.